A year ago, most of these people had never held a protest sign. In the last 4 years, a wave of uprisings has toppled governments, burned parliaments, and forced presidents to flee their own countries, led almost entirely by people under 25. No single leader, no single cause, just a generation that grew up online and decided the system wasn't working for them.
The current situation in Bangladesh.
To understand this whole global moment, you have to start in Bangladesh because this is where the modern template got written. Bangladesh has one of the youngest populations on earth, tens of millions of graduates every year chasing a shrinking number of stable jobs, and for decades getting one of the good jobs. A government job meant going through a quota system. Nearly a third of all civil service positions were set aside, originally for descendants of the freedom fighters who won Bangladesh its independence back in 1971. On paper, it sounds like a tribute to history. In practice, students said it had become a tool for one party, the ruling Awami League, to reward its own loyalists, generation after generation. This wasn't even the first time students had fought this. Back in 2018, a huge student movement forced the government to scrap the quota system entirely. It seemed like a win. But in June 2024, Bangladesh's High Court quietly reinstated it, restoring the very system students thought they'd already killed. For a generation already staring down a brutal job market, this didn't feel like a legal technicality. It felt like the door being slammed shut again, deliberately, right in front of them. Then on the 14th of July, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who had already been in power for 15 years, made a comment dismissing the students' demands. One that many young people heard as mockery, aimed directly at them personally. For a movement that had, up to that point, been relatively peaceful and narrowly focused, this was the moment it stopped being about a quota system at all. It became about her. The very next day, the ruling party's own student wing attacked anti-quota protesters, not just on campus at Dhaka University, but reportedly even inside a hospital, where injured students were already being treated. That single act of violence did more to grow this movement than any single organizer could have. Within days, what had been a policy dispute involving a few thousand students had turned into a nationwide uprising. On August 5th, after weeks of protest and roughly 300 deaths, Sheikh Hasina resigned and fled the country by military helicopter. Protesters stormed her official residence within the hours, walking through the halls of a building that, days earlier, had felt completely untouchable. 15 years of one woman's rule and one family's grip on Bangladeshi politics going back to its founding ended in a single afternoon. A year after Bangladesh, a strikingly similar story started unfolding in Nepal, except this time the government made a mistake almost too perfect for the moment. For months, frustration had been building quietly online. Nepali GenZ had been running a viral campaign mocking so-called Nepo kids, the children of politicians flaunting luxury lifestyles while ordinary graduates couldn't find work, corruption, nepotism, a stagnant economy, the same fuel as everywhere else. Then, on September 4th, 2025, the government did something that turned quiet resentment into an explosion overnight. The government suspended 26 social media platforms overnight, officially over a registration dispute, but widely understood as an attempt to choke off the very space where youth anger had been organizing. For a generation that lived online, this didn't feel like a policy decision. It felt like someone reaching into their pocket and switching off their entire social world. What followed was fast and brutal. By that evening, officials confirmed 19 protesters had been killed and more than 100 injured as police responded with tear gas and, according to multiple reports, live fire. Nepal's Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli called an emergency cabinet meeting. Within hours, his home minister resigned. Just before midnight, the government announced it was lifting the social media ban entirely. It was too late to undo what had already happened. The next morning, protests didn't stop, they widened. Demonstrators moved toward the federal parliament building itself. By the time the day was over, Nepal's parliament was in flames. So was the private residence of Prime Minister Oli and the homes of several other ministers. This was no longer a protest about an app ban. It was a full-blown reckoning with the political class the country's youth no longer trusted at all. That same day, Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli resigned. The army moved in, occupying the international airport and enforcing a nationwide curfew to try to stop the unrest from spreading further. By the time the violence finally settled, roughly 2 weeks later, the death toll had climbed to at least 74, with more than 2,000 injured. What had started as anger over a social media ban had, in less than a week, brought down a government. This next one is still happening as we're making this video, and it might be the strangest and most telling chapter in this entire story. It starts, of all places, in a courtroom.
Youngsters like cockroaches, they don't get any employment, they don't have any place in profession. Some of them become media, some of them become social media, some of them become RTI activists, some of them become another activists, and they start attacking everyone.
In May 2026, India's Chief Justice Surya Kant made a remark during a Supreme Court hearing comparing unemployed, chronically online young Indians to cockroaches, parasites on society, drifting towards social media and activism instead of contributing anything real. It was meant, presumably, as a throwaway line. It became the spark for one of the biggest youth movements India has seen in over a decade. Within a day, a political communication strategist named Abhijit Dipke posted a simple question online: what if all the cockroaches came together? He built a website and social media pages for what he called the Cockroach Janta Party, a direct satirical dig at the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. Same initials, same rhythm, cockroach instead of the actual party name. Its tagline, a political party for the people the system forgot to count. Within 78 hours, its Instagram account passed 3 million followers. Within 2 weeks, it had more followers than the real ruling party's official page. But the movement's real target wasn't the Chief Justice, it was India's Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan. Here's why. India's National Medical Entrance Exam NEET is taken by roughly 2 million students a year, competing for fewer than 150,000 seats. It's already one of the most high-pressure exams on earth. In 2026, it got worse. Question papers were leaked, the exam had to be scrapped and rescheduled, and there were tragic reports of student suicides linked to the fallout. For a generation already anxious about their future, this wasn't an abstract bureaucratic failure. It felt personal. Everything came to a head on July 20th, the opening day of a new session of India's parliament. Tens of thousands of protesters tried to march from their site-in-site to parliament itself. Police blocked the roads, cut the internet, and refused permission to march. Protesters went anyway. What followed was kettling, baton charges, and tear gas. One of the largest and most violent confrontations against Narendra Modi's government in his 12 years in power. Delhi police later said close to 180 people were injured, including both protesters and security personnel. And then, as we're finishing this video, it actually happened. On July 25th, Dharmendra Pradhan announced his resignation on X, writing that he deeply respected the aspirations and legitimate expectations of the country's youth. Within hours, CJP's leaders declared victory, saying the government had accepted their demands and told protesters to go home in good faith. Weeks of sit-ins, a hunger strike, and one of the tensest confrontations in Modi's 12 years in power ended for now with a resignation and a movement calling itself, only half-jokingly, a threat that shouldn't be messed with. Bangladesh, Nepal, India. On the surface, 3 completely different countries, 3 completely different governments, 3 completely different triggers, a court ruling, a social media ban, an offhand insult from a judge. But strip away the local details, and you start to notice the same skeleton underneath every single one of these stories. Underneath the spark, in every case, was the same real fuel, a widening gap between what young people were told to expect and what they were actually getting. More education than any generation before them, and fewer stable jobs to use it on. More visibility into how the rest of the world lives, thanks to the same phones in their pockets, and less ability to actually get there themselves. Rising costs of education, housing, healthcare, set against leaders many of them had never lived a single day without. That gap doesn't need a name or an ideology to become dangerous. It just needs a spark.